On today's show, we are interviewing a man who employs over 350 people, many of which are millennials. In fact, the vast majority of his workforce is comprised of millennials. On today's show, we're interviewing the best-selling author, Chris Tuff. Chris Tuff is the best-selling author of the book called The Millennial Whisperer. Yes, that's the Millennial Whisperer. On today's show, Chris Tuff shares with us his proven, profit-driven playbook for leading and managing the world's largest generation. But before we get into today's show, I thought I would read off some fun factoids for you about millennials according to Inc. magazine. Fact number 1, 64% of millennials would rather make $40,000 a year at a job they love, rather than to earn $100,000 working at a job that they think is boring. Well, we're going to need a whisper. 88% of millennials that were surveyed prefer working in a collaborative culture rather than a competitive one. Well, we are really going to need a whisper. 74% of millennials want flexible work schedules. Well, what are we going to do? We need a whisperer. 92% of millennials believe that business success should be measured by more than just profit. What? 69% of millennials now believe that office attendance is unnecessary on a regular basis.
Looks like I picked the wrong week to quit smoking.
According to Yahoo Small Business, 90% of the millennials surveyed now believe that being an entrepreneur simply means having a certain mindset rather than actually starting a company.
Looks like I picked the wrong week to quit sniffing glue.
And by 2025, 3 out of every 4 workers globally will be millennials.
Looks like I picked the wrong week to quit drinking.
Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you the Millennial Whisperer, Chris Tuff.
Saying it weird.
Saying what weird?
All of it.
Where do you get off?
I just don't get why you're saying it that way.
Why I'm saying what way?
Forget it.
I will forget it.
Some shows don't need a celebrity narrator to introduce the show, but this show does. 2 men, 8 kids, co-created by 2 different women, 13 multi-million-dollar businesses. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Thrive Time Show.
Now, 3, 2, 1, here we go!
Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, and we'll show you how to get here. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now we here.
Yes, and yes. Thrive Nation, on today's show, we're interviewing the man with a plan, the Millennial Whisperer, the USA Today best-selling author, Chris Tuff. Chris Tuff, welcome onto the Thrive Time Show, Dojo of Mojo Fo Show. How are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm going to try not to rhyme with that because I don't think I'd do a good job. But thanks for having me.
You got to bring out your inner Al Sharpton and rhyme all the time. It's a move.
That would be a bad interview, I can guarantee you.
Okay, so can you talk to us about what it means to be a Millennial Whisperer?
Sure. I mean, one of my favorite quotes since publishing a book was a friend of mine. He came up to me. He said, "Okay, Chris, I read your book. And you know what? Millennials aren't the problem. They just expose all the problems." And I said, exactly. That's exactly what I'm going after here, which is, you look at how much has changed around us, with technology and social media. And, the unfortunate side is that our corporations, whether it be small business or large enterprises, haven't adapted accordingly. And so this book is all about how to basically create an environment where millennials can thrive, and not only thrive, but how we can attract better millennials, how we can introduce new ways of working that aren't necessarily traditional, that can have a huge impact on our businesses.
What first inspired you to write this book, Millennial Whisperer, and what makes you qualified to write this book?
Yeah, so the great question. I think it's important to talk about. I'm 1980, so I'm right on the cusp of 1980 X and millennial.
What month were you born? What month and day?
July 11th.
I was born
1980.
I was born November 5th there. So, okay, we share that 1980-ness. That's incredible. You and I made it through life without wearing helmets while riding our bikes. This is
Exactly.
great. We didn't wear seat belts. We listened to cassette tapes. We had jean jackets, which are now coming back a little bit. We had big buttons. We had Milli Vanilli. We had Paula Abdul. We had all of that, but we managed to move on. So back to you, sir. I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
I think it's an important distinction because even if you take the millennial, that's 1981 to 2006, we're talking about people that are ages 37 all the way to 23-year-olds. And it's a massive group of people. And so the first thing I do, and this is kind of a testament to what you were just saying with the jean jackets and no bike helmets, I differentiate. I basically take the millennial kind of set of age group, and I divide them into two categories: older millennials, which I call Oregon Trail millennials, because they played Oregon Trail at some form of you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, you have to hunt. You have to hunt, and no matter what the question is, you hunt. That's what you did in Oregon Trail. If you wanted to win the affection of your friends, maybe not the game, but the affection of your friends, you would always hunt with Oregon Trail.
Exactly. And then you look at that juxtaposed to the younger millennials. They were given an iPhone with a Snapchat account at age 13.
Snake people, I call them. Snake people.
Yeah. So I call them the Snapchat millennials. And so it's two very different generations within a generation. And obviously, what makes them different generations is, one, when they adopted technology. And, a lot of the older millennials, we had beepers in college.
Beepers.
It
was hot.
We didn't have an iPhone or social media accounts.
Right.
So technology, and then the other piece being when the recession of 2008 either hit them or their parents. And so I wanted to get that out of the way. Older millennials, which we call Oregon Trail millennials, and then Snapchat millennials, younger millennials. But for me, what I fell into kind of the social media world in 2003 after graduating, my lucky 65th job interview.
What?
It was lucky 65.
Get out of here. 65 job interviews?
Yeah, lucky 65.
This just in. That's a lot. That's a lot.
It is.
Back to you.
It is. And I learned a lot, and I think it was an important process for me. I say to anyone working on my teams or asking me for advice for job stuff, I say life should be a ruthless pursuit of passions. And what those first 64 failed job interviews, educated me around was the fact that maybe these jobs aren't quite for me. And it was the 65th that I ended up interviewing at a digital ad firm, and kind of fell into, I was the 13th employee there. We grew from 13 employees to 400 and something. And it was during that time that I actually kind of fell into this digital media, social media space. And I was always surrounded by people younger than myself, but all very driven and successful people. I ended up having one of the first viral videos when I was getting engaged to my wife. I filmed my engagement in 2006. It was before YouTube.
Really?
And I put it on ChristopherTuff.com. I was running down the street of Atlanta, pretended to sprain my ankle. And I went from spraining my ankle to popping the question of my wife. And she said yes, obviously. But it was this scale of emotion that the internet had never really seen. And so I put it on ChristopherTuff.com, and I ended up getting 7 million views in 1 week.
Really?
Good Morning America flew down, interviewed us. We got our faces on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. It's a little ridiculous. But I also use that as an example of when you know that you've fallen into one of those kind of sweet zones within your career when crazy stuff starts happening and when you can't really differentiate between work and life. And so, it was from then on. I've been at my firm where I'm a partner, 22 Squared, for the last 10 years. And it really it was 2.5 years ago that the book kind of began to take form. When I hit rock bottom, I ended up really looking at my life. I took a month off, and I said to myself, I was kind of up for the prior 3 years. I was, going all over the place. I was kind of the tip of the arrow for the agency and selling. And, what I found was that everything was off. Although on the outside I was thriving, I was the youngest partner of my firm, et cetera, et cetera.
Looking good. You're very handsome still. I mean, you're handsome then, but probably more handsome now. You're kind of like
probably.
Okay,
it took a lot of life changes with it
People
since then.
You.
I don't know. But it was then that I kind of changed two of the biggest things, which was knowing that my metric of success was off because my prior metric was beating my brothers in the game of life. That was my metric of success.
Yes.
So it was just beating them at life.
Just beat them. No matter what they're doing, one up them.
One up.
Like a good brother should.
It's a horrible metric of success. So I
my
changed
bad,
that from beating them to the amount of impact made in a day when my head hits the pillow. And I went in that moment from being kind of the tip of the arrow to a coach. And I said, all right, I'm going to double down on my team. At that point, I had about 20 something, almost 30 millennials on my team. And I found that it was the most not only impactful and successful in the metric that I kind of had created role that I'd ever had, but I was able to make a big difference. And these both the younger and the older millennials began to thrive. And it was about 7 months into this that I was at an executive men's retreat, average age being about 40, mid 40s. And I introduced myself, and I didn't know how to introduce myself because I was no longer the business development guy. I wasn't the digital media guy. And I introduced myself. I said, you know what? I'm kind of the Millennial Whisperer. I've become that. And when I sat down after kind of sharing my story, the guy who was leading the retreat, Tommy Breedlove, who actually ended up writing my forward, I didn't know him at the time. He said, you better write that book. And I was like, what book? He goes, The Millennial Whisperer. And after he said that, a couple other guys around the fire, they're like, so what kind of stuff do you do, Chris? Like, tell us some of the things you do with your team. And I started using some of the examples, and they were like, you do that? It works? I was like, oh my gosh, I might have a book here. And fast forward, we're about 18 months since then. And I think we've sold 35,000 copies since publishing 3 months ago. And I think the sky's the limit. So it's been an amazing ride.
Now, Chris, what I'm going to do, I'm not trying to paint you into a corner here, but
Sure.
I thought I would herd up and round up, some of the selfie people, some of the people that are gluten-free, some of the people that are, sharing cars, making their own clothes, reclaiming things at thrift shops. I thought I'd get some of these people on the show. And so I have Daisy, who manages our call center. And Daisy, you are a millennial, correct?
Unfortunately.
Okay, now when were you born there,
So I was
Daisy?
born in 1988. Now, with it being 2019, I don't identify as a millennial, but
Whatever.
according to the internet, I am a millennial.
Whatever.
I
So
love
she Instagrams like 97% of her day. And the point is, no, but seriously, she manages the Elephant in the Room call center. And Daisy, you do manage a lot of millennials.
I do.
So I thought as a
yes.
fun kind of impromptu here, you could ask Mr. Chris Tuff, the Millennial Whisperer, any question you want about working with millennials, because he has a practical, profit-driven playbook for leaders to help better understand the world's largest generation, and you manage the generation.
Yeah.
Can you explain to Chris roughly how many people you're managing at the Elephant in the Room, just so he has a little context?
Yeah, so currently I have a team of 4 people, but because I do the scheduling for the whole team, we have 30 to 40 people on end at any given time. So
Okay, so
love it.
what question do you have for Mr. Chris Tuff?
So I want to know, I think that unfortunately millennials are very disillusioned in their expectations and can be very entitled.
Daisy's very negative. We call her Negative Daisy.
Well, I say this because I was that person. I thought, I'm just going to go get my degree and I'm going to fly through life and I don't have to work for anything. I'm just going to be handed my dreams on a silver platter, and life smacked me in the face and I realized that wasn't actually realistic. And so how do you get through to the millennial generation and kind of in a nice way shatter that entitlement without completely crushing their souls and dreams?
How do you shatter it in a nice way? Chris,
sorry.
so what do you do with that question?
Great question. And I get that. I'm asked this a lot, whether it be that or, hey, Chris, do you have to promote your do you find that you have to promote your millennials or create new job positions so you promote them every 6 months? Like it's kind of this endless cycle. And usually my immediate response to that is that if people are relying on those promotions or any of the big kind of accolades, if you will, then you're not rewarding and recognizing your people enough. And, rewards and recognition is a big part of what I kind of talk about practically within the book. And I say, if your head hits the pillow as a leader today and you're not utterly exhausted from rewarding and recognizing your people, you haven't done it enough. And so, so that's one side of it. It's like how do we build them up and create a real connection, but also recognize and reward them. In the book, I use an example of the big blue rooster, which was there's a company out in Domo, and they don't have to create new jobs or promotions every 6 months because they've got this big blue 10-foot rooster. And on your first day at Domo, you put your name and your at-bat song. So what song you want to come over the loudspeakers if you win something. And on the first day of every month, blue sirens go off in their warehouse/office. The person's at-bat song is blared over the loudspeakers, and then they drag this 10-foot blue rooster on wheels to sit next to that person's desk for the month. And that's all they do. And, that's kind of an extreme thing. But what I do on my team is I'm constantly building them up. And I start all of our team statuses, a lesser version of the big blue rooster. And we do it with snaps where we go around. I say, Meg, you killed it in that presentation. You went above and beyond. It's one of the best presentations I've ever seen. I just want to give you snaps. And we do that. And we do peer-to-peer recognition for the first 20 to 30 minutes, which also kind of goes through what would, usually be in an Excel document of a status sheet. So I think that's like more of how do we build them up? How do we accommodate for the fact that through most of their lives and your life, I would say, a lot of them had helicopter parents that the kind of participation trophy was a reality. And then the other side of it, especially with the younger millennials, and this is probably what you're seeing, is that anytime they wanted that recognition, they've had a Snapchat, Facebook, or something that they can post to get that instant gratification and validation. So we've got to build them up and create a real connection and reward and recognition. The other side of it, though, is what I think that feedback loop needs to be constant, right? And so we've got to over communicate with our people where they're doing right and where they're doing wrong. And so, and it seems common sense, but reward in public and kind of reprimand in private. And when you're doing that reprimanding, it's more about, I say you got to build a better sandwich where you go in and you say, listen, Derek, let's just say Derek's the person. You're doing a great job. And so you go in with kind of a compliment and you go, and there are a couple of things I think you can do a little bit better. And you go in and you talk about the things they can do better, and then you end it with another compliment. So It's a little bit easier for people to digest. But then, on top of all of that I constantly reiterate with this generation, along with ourselves, is that the grass is not greener on the other side, people. We live a lot of our lives on Instagram and in these social feeds where we're comparing our insides to other people's outsides, and we have this idea that there's a perfect job out there or a perfect thing, right? And that's why everyone ends up leaving their job. And sometimes they end up coming back. Like at our agency, a lot of people we call them boomerangs because they end up coming back because they're like, actually, it wasn't that great. But it's what I call my 70-30 rule. And my 70-30 rule is that 30% of your job is going to suck. 30% of life is going to be hard, and we've got to accept that. 70% should fuel you up and fire you up along the way. So I think with those tactics in place, we're able to create more of a reality for them to kind of remind themselves, but also ground them in something that is real. So, and once again, that's what this whole book's kind of about. So I could talk forever about, I think, Chris, some of the things we can address.
I've got more millennials here in the box. I went to a local ride-sharing community, to an Instagram convention there via an Uber, where I met a bunch of randos living together, talking about their feelings. They were shooting flare guns in an abandoned warehouse while taking pictures of their food.
All the corners of hipster coffee shops.
And I found this guy who hasn't had a job, but he's been living with his mom for several months. No, this guy's name is Harley. He is a business consultant.
What's up, Chris?
Like a typical millennial, he's named after a brand.
That's right.
Harley, his parents are huge Harley enthusiasts. And so, Harley, can you tell him a little bit about yourself? When did you graduate from college? How old are you? And then what question do you have for Chris Tuff, the Millennial Whisperer?
Yeah. So, Chris, first of all, glad to talk with you. I'm not sure which section of millennials I'm at. I'm born in 95, so would that make me a Snapchat millennial?
You're a Snapchat millennial.
Oh, okay. Okay, good to know. I was born in 95, graduated from Oral Roberts in 2013, and started up with Clay about a year and a half ago. But my question is, you talk about this difference between Oregon Trail millennials and Snapchat millennials. And my thought is that a lot of the complaints or the negative articles about millennials in the workforce is based on the Snapchat millennials But what do you find are some of the biggest differences between these two segments? Because it is a large age group of people with
first
a lot
off,
of
Oregon
innovation.
Trail's better. I'll tell you that. Anyway, we'll just start off with that. I want to be fair and objective here, Chris. Let's get into the question.
So, a great question. And, I think if you look at a lot of the stuff that's coming around Gen Z, which are the ones that are just now hitting our job kind of marketplace, they're the ones just now graduating. As you get closer to that generation, you're seeing more commonalities amongst them. So first of all, I want to make sure that what drives me crazy and what I'm trying to do with this book is get rid of that just stereotype. And I do it with my cover where it has all of the negatives. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but entitled, needy, impatient, naive. It's like we got to throw all that stuff out.
Andrew's going to pull up your cover of your book real quick so everyone can see the cover.
Yeah, just so you guys can see it.
Currently in our office, Harley just calls me old people, and I call him snake person. That's how we deal with the stereotypes.
It's very affectionate, yes.
Yeah. Okay. No stereotypes here.
But I'll tell in a lot of my media interviews, and people will ask me about this example or this example of millennials that have done things. I'm like, we've got to stop using millennial as a synonym for inexperienced and young. Because guess what? Millennials are inexperienced and young. And not only that, but we've got a massive generation. So we can't really stereotype them in the way that we have for so long. Whether you want to admit it or not, they're coming, right? So there's no longer can we ignore that. But as you look at kind of the key differences, there's, especially with what 2008 did. So how old were you in 2008, Harley?
I would have been, I believe, 13. Yeah.
Okay, so you were right, and you were 13 when the recession hit our parents or your parents, and what that has done within, I think, a little bit of you, and or just kind of obviously generalizing. You're looking when you see your parents lose their job, it instills this thing within your foundation that as you go out to find your job, you're looking for a little bit more stability. And, which is very different than the older millennials where a lot of us were I say us, I'm right on the cusp.
No, you and I, You very old, father time millennials.
The old millennials or the young Gen
Daisy
Gen
called
X.
me old the other day. She wrote me a letter of appreciation, and on it she said, I'm old. True story. So I'll go back to you, Chris. I just want to
So sorry.
point that out.
But
It's fine. You're stating the facts. It's fine.
But we had to fend for ourselves, and a lot of us we were forced into an entrepreneurial track, and so I think we're a little bit more entrepreneurial and willing to take risks and put it all on the line than you see in that younger generation. Once again, on the technology side, what I find is that the older millennials are a little bit more adept at having person-to-person conversations and dealing with conflict, whereas the younger ones, you got to force it a little bit. And I create rules, and sometimes that's the best way to do it. But for example, one of my rules is that if someone's in the same building as us, there's no IMing, texting, or emailing them. You got to walk over to their desk to actually talk person to person.
That's a great rule. That's a
so
great
controversial.
Rule. That's a hot rule.
Yeah.
Talking to people in your same building. Back to you.
Yeah, and face to face. And so especially as you look at that younger millennial set, that's not as instinctual as the older one. So once again, there's huge differences, but as a whole, we're thrown into one generation. And I think there are tactics that we can put into place to not only change the environment as leaders, but to change the cultures within our walls. And the last piece, which is probably the biggest difference, is that if your company does not have a purpose that's bigger than yourself and a bottom line or a profit margin or a stock symbol or whatever it is, then you've got to start digging for that, because the older millennials, but especially the younger millennials, purpose is so paramount to attracting that next generation. So as you get into Gen Z specifically, purpose is one of the most important traits of attracting that talent, and something much bigger than, once again, just a profit margin. For example, so what we did as an agency, we're 370 employees, 90% millennials, and our purpose is together we give rise to change, which is change in the world, making a difference. And we also follow that up with, we give everyone 5 days off to donate their time to a nonprofit of their choice. So you got to walk the talk as well.
Now, Chris, we have 5 more millennials. They're going to just be bombarding you with their stereotypical millennial questions. I mean, questions that are different based upon Oregon Trail or okay, so let's get in here. Our next, sir, can you introduce yourself to Mr. Chris Tuff, and then make sure you eat that microphone like it's your most celebrated, famous, favorite corn dog of all time, because that microphone is so sensitive. It's more sensitive than the average Instagram millennial. Okay, so get right up on that microphone.
Okay.
And what question do you introduce yourself and ask Chris whatever question you have?
Sure. Chris, hi. My name is Tanner Kinnan, and I just started with a company that Clay works with called the Leadership Initiative, and I am a recent graduate of Oklahoma State University. So I am fresh out of being surrounded by a bunch of people at the back end of this millennial generation, and I'm realizing that the majority of the people that I come into contact to are not prepared for adulthood.
Oh.
So how much of the blame do you place on the parents that allowed their child to become 22 years old and have no value of money or time management or things like that?
Oh, snap. That's a tough question, Chris.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we can't really do anything to undo that, right? So I would say what ends up changing is our role as leaders. And I say that as a leader of younger millennials or just millennials in general, it's up to us to help bring some of those things. Because there's nothing we can do when they show up. I mean, and it's really not your guys' fault or these people's fault, because you look at not only the helicopter parenting or the snowplow parenting, we're seeing it with these parents that have jammed their kids into schools, et cetera, et cetera. These kids, they went from their school to lacrosse practice to SAT practice to their bilingual immersion course in Japanese to the next thing and the next thing. And then we scratch our heads when they show up on our doorstep why they aren't better prepared for the world. And so what I say is that it changes our role as leaders to create better connection and role models for them. And so one of the tactics I talk about to create connection is, one, follow your people on social media. So when they show up on Monday, you can say, actually develop a real rapport without you being condescending or patronizing, because there's nothing worse than a boss telling you how to live your life or how to balance your time, etc. The other piece is in our one-on-ones, giving our people the option to talk about life, to talk about some of those things they're struggling with, whether it be relationship, whether it be finances, or any of the above, any of those things that I think we just, especially this generation, struggles with because they don't have it in their kind of day-to-day repertoire. So I think some people also, they're like, wait, Chris, doesn't that create like a friendship? Like you can't be friends with your people. I'm like, why not? Like, why can't we throw our systems out the window a little bit and start accommodating for what we're being dealt?
It's not my place to one-up you about your own points because you're the author. But I will say, I agree. I think you should strive to be friends with your employees. And if they're the kind of person you don't want to be friends with, then you probably shouldn't have hired them. So I think it's really important to try to be friends with people. We have a young lady here. Her name's Mariah. She's on fire.
Am I doing okay so far?
We're doing great. No, you've never probably been bombarded by, because most, there's a lot of podcasters that have employees, but very few have as many as we have. So I thought, let's round up some great people, a.k.a. the snake people, the people that all ride share together, the people that have no goals and aspirations and are easily offended. And let's get all the people that all here in the box, and let's address all those stereotypes at one time. This young lady, her name is Mariah. She's on fire, and we go back like babies in pacifiers. And she's on the show to talk to you about whatever she wants to talk about. But Mariah, can you introduce yourself and explain to Chris how long you've been on the Elephant in the Room men's grooming lounge team?
Yeah, my name is Mariah. I've been on the Elephant in the Room lounge team for about 3 weeks now. I'm in the call center, and we're centralized. My question is, in a world that's...
And just eat that microphone like it's a special occasion.
Microphone.
Oh, yeah. It's a wedding cake.
Got it.
Yeah.
So in a world that's so centralized about being inclusive to everybody, why do you think it is that everyone is so judgmental in general and negative about millennials?
Yeah, I mean, I think you see it with any generation that's coming along. You ask any generation about what it was like, especially the older ones within that generation, older Xers, older boomers, they all went through similar things. Mm-hmm. But one thing that is different now than ever before is how quickly technology has changed. So there's been some, I mean, and we all recognize it, right? I mean, look at how fast trends are now moving because of our accessibility to social media and news and these things that are essentially molding our lives. So, I think that every generation goes through it. It's just the rate of change has been so rapid recently that there's a greater almost divide and apprehension to letting go or changing the way, adapt our ways. Work flexibility is one of my favorite ones to talk about, because if you ask, statistically from the 2018 Deloitte Millennial Survey, what millennials are looking for from their organizations, work flexibility is the top three. Number two is culture. Number one is no different than any other generation, which is pay and benefits. And, because of what's basically our mobile phones have done, we expect our people to respond to things outside of work hours. So we've got to change the way we approach work hours and where people are working. And so I think that it's basically the rate of change within technology and then also society around that has made this divide that much more stark. It was funny. I was talking to someone recently about a similar thing. And it's amazing as parents. I'm a parent of a 9-year-old and 7-year-old, and I will do anything for them, right? And you see these parents of these millennials, they'll do anything for their millennial child. But yet deep down, for anyone outside of their child, they're saying, well, I had to do it this way. Why don't they have to go through this? I had to be in my seat from, 8 in the morning till whatever is 6
My
at
dad,
night.
for instance, didn't even talk to me until I was 27. He just left me in the woods, and he said, "Just figure it out." And I'm like, "Okay." And I said, "Thank you." He had me spank myself so I wouldn't get in trouble. So he wouldn't get in trouble with if he's an aggressive parent. He said, "Spank yourself." So I lived in the woods.
Sure.
And I'm happy about it. And I don't think anybody out there who didn't have to walk uphill both ways should complain, because I was happy about it. I was happy. I was crying all the time.
And millennials will be doing the same thing with Z, and the same thing's going to happen with Z to the next one, et cetera, et cetera. But the rate of change is just increasing. So I think the divide will barrier or whatever you want to call it will just also increase with that.
Now, we have a guy on the show here named Sean. Now, Sean, just so you know, a lot of people, specifically his cohort in the office, calls him Shonda. Sean works as a consultant helping clients to practically execute a proven plan, and he's a great American. Sean, you want to introduce yourself here to Mr. Chris Tuff and then ask him the tough questions that you love to ask our guests?
Well, hello, Chris. This is Sean.
What's up, Sean?
I am excited to talk with you today, Chris. I have a question for you, a hard-hitting question here about this principle Napoleon Hill calls over-delivery. And this principle with millennials, how do you teach this sort of principle? Better yet, how can a small business owner bring this principle into his culture, in his own business?
Can you explain over-delivery?
So Napoleon Hill says that if you over-deliver, you shall be overpaid. There's another quote on the wall here in the bathroom that I think was Clay Clark. It says, it's got an arrow pointing down to the hole.
That's our private time.
No, I'm just going to be honest. To be honest here, there's a hole in the urinal that there's an arrow pointing to, and it says, if you're not willing to work for 5 years without praise, go ahead and deposit your goals and dreams here. And I think that a lot of millennials have a hard time just like getting that idea that it's going to take so much work and so much more work to actually accomplish anything that matters. How can a small business owner bring that sort of mindset in and really have it sink in for millennials?
Ooh, Sean, he's got a good question.
That's a really good one. I mean, I think there's two sides of it. I think leaders will have to adapt to create a culture and a real culture that is healthy. Where you are rewarding and recognizing your people. I don't think there's any way around that. I'm not saying, whether it be a golden coin that you're giving out or some sort of recognition, you've got to have it in place. And listen, some of our most successful, largest institutions like the Army has done this for years. So this isn't anything outside of the way that businesses or organizations have worked. So I do think that has to be in place. But, the other side of it is I think that with that communication and with that, there's this idea in the book that I It's called Protect Your House. And if you look at what millennials are looking from their leaders, they're looking for inspirational leadership, they're looking for autonomy, and they're looking for transparency and purpose. So as long as a small business leader, make sure you have those things in place. The other piece is there's this idea of protect your house. And when I was writing this book, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to talk to the leaders. So I looked at Forbes. Forbes named this guy, Ben Kirshner, the #1 boss for millennials. I was like, well, I got to talk to this dude. So I called him and I asked him about what he does around specifically autonomy. How do you create more autonomy without necessarily having some of these other things in place? And he said, well, all I do, I remind my people it's up to them to protect this house. We created something special. If you don't have something special that people think that it's worth fighting for, then you got to dig and redo that, because people aren't going to stick around. But when you do have something, push it down on them to protect this house. So when there's a bad culture fit, or if someone's slacking or falling behind, it doesn't necessarily just have to come from you as the boss. It can come from them. And so I thought that was an interesting piece that we can introduce and also remind our people as they're trying to be that inspirational leader. It's up to you all to protect this house and this culture that I can already tell that you guys have a culture that's thriving. Like, you're all laughing, you get along. Like, that is something worth protecting. And I think something that we oftentimes don't necessarily implement as leaders, because we just want to control everything.
Now, just to give you a little context here, we've got three more people that have tough questions. Now, Andrew has never cursed at work, but we believe subconsciously he's a cursor. And so I don't know, at any moment he could blow up because he's a millennial. At any moment he could just freak out. He could just lose his mind. So we're worried about him. Then we've got our next two guests. They're Stormin' Mormons. Now, let me tell you what I mean by a Stormin' Mormon. They're never late to work. They're always on time. They're sharp. They don't curse. They're Mormons, And I mention that because we have all different faiths and religions that listen to the show. But I would say these two are kind of outliers. So, Ben, I'm going to let you have the first crack at the question here. And, Ben, what you're going to get to do is you get to ask our Millennial Whisperer, Chris Tuff, any question you want. Now, Ben manages our search engine optimization team. Always on time, sharp, takes notes, dresses to impress. He's like it's like he's like 85. He's like an 85. He's like he's like an 85-year-old man. It's like he was born in 1960 or something. I don't get what's going on. He's like a relic from like the 50s or 60s. He opens the door for women. He speaks highly of his wife. All these crazy controversial ideas. Ben, could you ask Mr. Chris Tuff, the Millennial Whisperer, any question you want? But you got to make sure you eat that mic like it's a religious Mormon activity, and you have to do it or you're in trouble with the church.
All right, hey Chris, does this sound good?
Yeah, what's up?
Yeah. All right, so I manage the team over in the search engine optimization land, and my question for you is, how can I properly motivate them? So I'm the youngest one on that team. They're all either a couple years older than me or a little bit older than me. And how do I properly motivate them without sitting them down and be like, oh, I'm sorry, how do you feel today? What kind of a number goal would you want? Because it's a really tedious process to do search engine optimization. And so how do I keep properly motivated them to hit those goals without coming across as either too soft or without having to, put on like a super bossy boss kind of attitude and be like, sure. You sucks to suck, just do it.
Let me cue up my Drake sound effect real quick so it's a nice smooth transition. Here we go. All right, Chris, back to you.
Yeah, so I think motivation is one of those things. Well, first of all, I think I have we hear this a lot, that you've got to hire slow and fire fast. And so, part of that hiring slow and firing fast is making sure that we have the right people that are motivated in the first place, right? And I encourage everyone, when they can, to actually test drive people as contractors for 6 weeks before hiring them on. I have a 20% and maybe even less than that success rate when I end up bringing people on, because either we find that their passions lie elsewhere or that they're just not cut out for the type of job that they're coming into.
You're suggesting hiring people for 6 weeks as a contractor before bringing them on as an employee.
100%. Yep.
That's a hot move. That's a hot move. I've done that move. That right there, Thrive Nation. You should write that down. You should print that out. You should put that on a shirt. Hashtag craziness. That's awesome. That's an awesome move. Back to you, sir.
So the other piece is creating that culture. I use an example in the book with a friend of mine that has a thriving dental practice called Atlanta Dental Spa, and what he does, he has a similar issue, not to you, but he can only be one person at one place at any given time, and he's got all of these young dentists and tons and tons of people underneath them. I think he has 5 different offices in Atlanta. And so one thing he created, and this does kind of go back to the rewards and recognition thing, is he calls them ADS bucks. And every month he gives out a blank kind of ADS buck, which is $50 that anyone on the team they have to give it to someone else on the team for something they've done, going above and beyond, all those things that I think end up motivating people to go above and beyond, to help each other out, but also to do a good job. And so what he said was fascinating, but it makes sense. But when you do this month after month, you walk up, so it's in a common wall. So everyone, I'll say, here's to Clay for, really killing it on that podcast and for helping me out when 6 o'clock I needed the blah, 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 right?
Oh, yeah, I specialize in bringing the blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So, and then, so I put it on the wall, and then, Clay walks up at the end of the month and he sees there's 5 of them, so he just made $250 that goes straight into his pocket when he redeems these with the head guy. So, not only that, but you get the people that walk up to the wall and they see month after month, there's nothing up there for it. So it's almost self-selection where it's like, okay, I'm obviously not doing something right. So I think there are things that we can do without it necessarily being up to you to keep them motivated. The other piece is just, I think we need to use our opportunity when we're getting with our people on all hands meetings, etc.
Yep.
You've got to create that vision and that specific goal and that benchmark and say, guys, this is what we're going after. And I was in with a CEO recently, and I was showing off some of my tattoos.
Whoa.
And he was like, do you think it would help if I said to my team that I would get a tattoo of and this guy's super conservative. But if I said that if they hit their sales goal, I'll get a tattoo of our logo on my left hand, on my left arm in front of them all. I was like, hell yes. He was like, okay, well, let's go see. He rounded up all his people. He was like, if you guys hit your sales goal, I will bring in a tattoo artist and get it done in front of everyone. Everyone went wild. And guess what? I bet they end up hitting their goals. That's motivation.
There it is.
I think we need to get more creative about how we keep our people motivated without necessarily just, thinking that they're just going to do it. Because if you're going to think that they're just going to do it, they're not going to.
Now, we have our next guest here, Andrew Bloomer. Andrew, I give you the floor here. Andrew is married. He's 20 years old. He's worked with me for now, I think, 3 years, Andrew. Is that right, 3 years?
That's correct.
I'm going to let you ask the tough questions that really you'd want to ask because you work as a coder.
True.
You work as an advertisement ad manager for us, and you also do some consulting with clients. You've been here a long time. You are married, and you do own a rental house already.
That's
so
true.
You got a kind of a quick head start, but feel free to paint our guest into a corner.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Hey, I had a quick question about scheduling and why it's so important to focus. A lot of times we have a problem with focusing because there are so many distractions in the world. There's our cell phone. There's people are constantly asking you to do things for them, with them, whatever the circumstance. So I find in my life that it's extremely important to be proactive about your day and to get up early, schedule your day, look at what you have going on that day. So I'm curious as to, what benefits do you see is to being proactive, turning off your phone, saying no to distractions, and being able to focus on whether it be work or whether it be an activity you want to dive deep into, or whether it be your business. What are the benefits of turning off the phone, being proactive, and scheduling out your day that people, even millennials, should be doing, and not just people who own businesses?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think one of the things, I don't necessarily have rules except like during meetings, we'll actually have a system where everyone has to drop their phone at the table as they're walking in, and they've got to stack, and they stack them on each other. So they just all sit there. So we have people's undivided attention. And so I think creating a culture where that's the norm is really important. But you talk about focus, and, I think we oftentimes, and especially in our society, we only recognize what I call champagne moments. And instead, we need to focus more on the little things in the ride that lead up to those champagne moments. And so instead of doing those quarterly goals and whatnot, I tend to say that to everyone, it's all of those small things that end up leading to that. So how do we create a drive? And it's my kind of 3 things. I said, on your to-do list, there should be no more than 3 things at any given time. I see some of these things and it's like, that's daunting. Of course you're going to get distracted and check Instagram because you haven't even gotten through 3 out of 19. So it's only, and I work with them on this and I help them prioritize, and it's like 3 things at any given time. And what that does is by me, and it is up to me to help them with that stuff as a leader, I think. It's not, you can't just expect them to learn this, and then with time they learn it. But how do we create an environment to where they are driving forward all of those little things that then end up becoming some of these more champagne moments, if you will. So, I think a lot of that is on the leader to help them with. And if there's not a system in place to do that, then I think we need to look to reorganize our systems to accommodate for that better.
Now, Chris, how many people work in your business?
We have 370 employees.
Okay. So our final question, I just want to give some context for the listeners. Our final question is going to be asked to you by Amelia, who is married to Ben, who you heard earlier, and great couple, wonderful people. They're just, they come to the office, they bring joy every day, great energy, and she is does a vital role on our team right now, and she's also learning to do consulting. So she's kind of transitioning out of being the person who runs all the advertisement stats and checks the weekly advertisement totals for clients, as well as doing a variety of tasks, but she's learning to do consulting. And so Amelia, what question do you have for Mr. Chris Tuff? And just make sure you eat that microphone as though it is a spiritual quest.
All right. Hey, Chris, how's it going?
What's up?
Hey, yeah. So my question for you, in today's world, I feel like everyone is so easily offended. So how do you best deliver constructive criticism without emotional outbursts, whether that be anger or offense or sadness? How do you best deliver the hard news?
So, well, I think one, you've got to have an overlying system to where you're constantly giving people that feedback, and that feedback loop is in constant engagement and in real time, because there's nothing worse than waiting for some sort of quarterly review to give people feedback.
True.
Like, we've got to be doing this in real time. And so taking action in the moment, I think people are a lot more adept and less sensitive when you're doing it that way. The other piece is, once again, I call it my building a better sandwich, where it's how you deliver it, right? So I would say, let's say for a speech, for example, I would say, Clay, you did a really good job. And so you don't say but, so you want to say but, and you just say, so you did a really good job presenting in front of the client, and so use and. I was counting how many times you said and I counted about 23. So that's definitely something that we need to watch out in the future. And then you build the other side of that sandwich, the other piece of bread, you end it with something that's a little bit more uplifting and say, I can't believe how far you've come in the last year, blah, blah, blah. And so that is just one simple and tactical way that I think we can give this feedback in a way that it's easier for people to digest. But once again, when you start having that constant communication in real time, it becomes easier.
Chris, Amelia is going to be working with a lot of clients who manage millennials, so she might have maybe another question for you. And if not, I have one final question for you. Amelia, do you have any other final questions for Chris Tuff as you paint him into a corner here on the Thrive Time Show?
Yeah. So kind of a follow-up with that question, as far as delivering the hard news. I know there's a lot of management books out there that say always just only give positive reinforcement, no negative reinforcement. What's the balance there? I mean, of course you have to have positive reinforcement or nobody's going to want to be in that work environment. But you need that negative to also enforce your standards and make sure that the action items are completed. What is the balance between those two?
I would say it falls in line with my 70-30 rule, where 70% of your job should fire you up and fuel you up. 30% of it's going to suck. And of our jobs, there's 30% of our jobs that we're probably not that good at, or we just don't like doing it. And so I would say your feedback should follow something similar. But the other thing I talk about in the Millennial Whisperer is that having that open and honest feedback goes a long way. And even when you have a bad seed, let's say, for example, who's just not working out, you approach them and say, listen, you just don't seem that excited about being here. Let's talk about what some of the options are out here, and maybe I can open up some doors for you outside of these walls. And people will ask, how do you fire people? I'm like, it's the easiest thing in the world, because it's usually them saying, yeah, I don't really like this and it's not a good fit and I'm going to end up leaving. So practicing that honest feedback in a way is really important, and also making sure that you're doing it constantly.
Chris, I appreciate you for taking time out of your schedule to answer questions from a large variety of millennials up here at the Thrive Time Show. And I just appreciate you more than you know, my friend. I'll let you have the final word. Do you have any word of encouragement, or maybe a place where listeners can check out your book? Or what would be your final word for the listeners out there?
Yeah, my final word, everything that I'm doing is about how do we bring more empathy and more connection into the world. And I think we need to start where we spend most of our time. It sounds like you all have a great environment where that exists, and there are a lot of places that they don't, that doesn't exist. So I think that's essentially what triggered me to write this thing. And one of my favorite sayings is, I think we live in a society without accountability. And we love to talk about things, but we don't actually follow through with those taking action. And so I say you've got to turn your let's and answer it with a by when. So I implore on everyone, try this, practice this. So next time someone says, let's grab coffee or let's grab dinner, immediately say by when. And they'll be like, next week. And you'll end up actually having that dinner or coffee or drink or whatever it is.
True.
Or you'll find out that they didn't even want to hang out with you in the first place.
That's right.
And so bringing more of that into our lives, I encourage everyone to just take action, start small, put in some of these tactics. If you want to download the first chapter, I've set up on the site, themillennialwhisperer.com, and you just /Thrive Time. And millennial is spelled with 2 L's and 2 N's. I know that after writing this book, it's a difficult word to spell. But I'll have a free downloadable chapter there, as well as a millennial leadership assessment. So any leaders that are listening and they're like, I wonder how I rank on some of these things that are important to millennials, you can take that free leadership assessment as well. You can pick up my book at Amazon or any of your local booksellers, and now in the airport.
Andrew, we got to buy a copy of that book right now, and we got to leave him an objective review on Amazon, because that way he'll know that we actually have gone through the ebook, and now we were going to pick up the hardcover, the hardcover of the book here for $18.19, I believe, on Amazon. We're buying the book right now, Chris. We're leaving you a review. I cannot express to you how much I appreciate you being on the show, and hopefully this has not been your worst interview of all time.
No, I love it. And I find it very refreshing, especially talking to other millennials out there. So I think the best is yet to come. And thanks so much for having me on.
Hey, have a great day. And now, without any further ado, we like to end each and every show with a boom. And so here we go. 3, 2, 1, boom!
You're saying it weird.
Saying what weird?
All of it.
Where do you get off?
I just don't get why you're saying it that way.
Why I'm saying what way?
Forget it.
I will forget it.